Okay. It's been a little while since I've read this book, I'll be honest. This video builds off a short review I wrote about the book almost a year ago now, I think, but I have a razor-sharp mind with exceptional memory and will never get anything wrong about anything, least of all this guy. Now that I'm done having a stroke, let's leave whatever sentence it was that I probably just said and don't remember on the table. Take that! It's a story about a post-apocalyptic future where the emergency already happened an unidentified amount of time ago, and it follows the protagonist Orphan, a plucky and violent adventure girl who lives on an island in the sea for her whole life while the world of zombies, Scrake in the story, destroyed all of the mainland. It's set in Ireland. We'll get more into that later. Orphan is the daughter of her mother Maureen and her mother's partner Maeve, both of whom are accomplished Scrake killers who venture off the island in supply runs every now and again and come back with lots of close calls and run-ins. Even accomplished Scrake hunters can only prepare so much. These two train Orphan in the skills necessary to live in a world like this one, skills like fighting, throwing knives, scavenging and foraging, navigation. She's never seen another human, alive at least, besides Maeve and Maureen, and both of them constantly warn her about the two main threats, Scrake and men. The story is a little bit hard to go through and analyze like I normally do with stories in videos like this one, because it oscillates back and forth by chapter between the present, where we begin with Orphan carting around the corpse of Maeve in a wheelbarrow while trying to get to a place called Phoenix City, avoiding and fighting Scrake like the sort of amateur she is on account of her only ever having been off the island one time until now, and the past in varying degrees thereof, where Davis Goff confidently and conveniently gives us little slices of context from Orphan's childhood. I mean, Orphan is still technically a child right now, she's only like 15, but not as much of a child, I guess. That frames what's happening in the present. The main storyline obviously happens in the more recent of these two concurrent timelines, and is the main one of focus if you're trying to get the plot of the story. And I am of the opinion that you could theoretically read only the past chapters, and then only the present chapters in that order, and get the story, but thanks to the conceit of this sort of literary jumping back and forth device, it's sort of necessary to read it in the intended way, because otherwise there will be some twists that get spoiled at the end. So I think what I'm going to try to do is go through the present day plot and reference the past bits where it is necessary. Needless to say, from this point on, this is crazy spoiler territory, so you've been warned. The story goes like this. Orphan lives on this island way out in the water where a bridge once led from mainland Ireland, but it's now completely isolated, and has been for a very long time. I would wager at least one generation, if not more. Probably 2 or 3 at this point. Her mother and her mother's partner have built like a little farm on this island, and the 3 of them train constantly at fighting, weaponry, other sort of D&D ranger type skills. Apparently the world has long since been overtaken with the zombie Scrake apocalypse, and this island is perhaps the only place left in the world, maybe, that has no zombies on it whatsoever. For the first 12 years of Orphan's life, she goes about being a child in a training regimen that would make the military tired, learning all the necessary skills to maybe one day go off the island for whatever reason might happen. Secretly, while her parents are off the island doing supply runs, they have been trying to find more people that they could maybe join up with. But it comes about, and Orphan finds this out almost accidentally and then through force, that they come from a place called Phoenix City, a place that they fled, and which they will not even mention or allow Orphan to know about. They do teach Orphan to read, which turns out to be a sort of lost skill later on, and she gets herself into mischief by finding and reading posters and pamphlets and things about how it's safe in Phoenix City and all of that sort of business. You know, the standard, we are in the zombie apocalypse, Scrake apocalypse, but here is a place where a bunch of survivors have gathered together, and now they are safe-ish there. You can go there to be safe, I guess. Anyway, the two main things that we keep hearing about are Phoenix City and Banshees. We don't really know what either of them are, as Phoenix City is not on any of the maps that Orphan finds in the little abandoned town on the island, and Banshees are left completely unexplained by her parents. One day when Orphan is 12, her parents go off island in preparation for bringing her along with them the next time around to sort of sweep and make sure that there are no scrake in the coastline area, because it would really not be great for the very first time 12-year-old fighter Orphan comes off the island, she gets murdered by a zombie. And of course, because this is how the conceit of the story must go, her mother gets bitten. Maeve brings her back to the island, and they sort of tie her to the bed and watch her turn over the course of 2 weeks or so, after which Orphan is supposed to kill the resulting scrake. That's the turning point where Maeve has to actually start parenting this child, and for the next 3 years they get along middlingly, maybe at best. Orphan says she hates Maeve, and that's probably true, but Maeve does not allow for emotion between them, so that Orphan doesn't have much to grasp on for the hate. Most of what happens between them is wake up in the morning, go do training, feed the chickens, pull the vegetables, do the setter, go to sleep, wake up the next day. Maeve continues to train Orphan, of course, and while they grow together, they also sort of get hardened to each other as well. And then finally, they both head over the water to the mainland, and predictably, Maeve also gets bit. So in an effort to try to pry the last bit of information out of this dying woman, rather than killing her immediately like she was made to promise she would, she instead puts Maeve in a wheelbarrow and starts in the vague direction of where she thinks this place called Phoenix City might be, hoping that in the last moments of clarity, Maeve will reveal where it is to her so she can get a cure from this place if one exists at all. And that's all leading up to page 1, where we find Orphan hunched over, rolling the wheelbarrow on foot through infested territories with her dog Danger by her side. And there's some sort of bleak post-apocalypse stuff about not having enough food or water, being wary of every sound in the environment, making sure that you are looking around you at 360 degrees at all times, making sure that anywhere that you go has at least, 2 exits and that you're always ready to, etc., etc. Traditional zombie apocalypse stuff. But then eventually, Orphan runs into a group of 2 women and a man. A man, which is a creature she's never seen before in real life, fleeing from the direction of what she expects as Phoenix City. Some shenanigans happen with Orphan not trusting them, then almost being killed by a landmine, and losing the dog, which is not great. So if this is not the kind of thing that you are willing to put up with, don't. Or at least be prepared. Anyway, Orphan almost gets killed by a landmine, and then she wakes up later with that party, somewhat far away from the site of the blast, without the corpse of Maeve. So she forces them to go back with her to get Maeve again, and eventually only the man, named Cillian, relents to go back while the pregnant woman and the small child continue along. And it's interesting to note that during one of the first bits, Orphan takes the small child, Aid her name is, Orphan takes the small child and puts a knife up to her and is like, I'll kill her if you don't give me my stuff back. And then they do some little distraction thing, and Aid kicks her in the stomach, which is a thing that normally children don't know how to do, but it was a pretty strong sidekick. So keep that in mind, that this small child knows somewhat about how to kick a person. Cillian relents to go back while the pregnant woman and the small child continue along, with the aim of meeting up with everybody later. Through some cajoling and not a small amount of terrifying danger and a whole lot of threatening Cillian, Orphan gets the man to tell her that they are all from Phoenix City, of course, but that the place sucks, really bad. Women have 2 purposes there: breeders or banshees. Banshees, ding ding ding, that's the word that we've been hearing about, that Orphan really wants to know about. And men have only 1 unspecified purpose. The pieces of the plot begin to fall together as Orphan remembers a conversation that she heard between her mother and Maeve, where she hears that the reason they fled the city was because Maureen, her mother, got pregnant when she was not supposed to. So they find Maeve, who is full Scrake at this point, and Orpin has to kill her, much to her chagrin. Then spend some time sort of looking for the rest of the party, and Orpin promises that she will show everyone where her Scrake-free home is on the island after they find each other. The man is real dumb and lights a fire, which attracts not only the attention of the two women, but also the significant number of Scrake in the area, so when they do eventually all meet back up, they have to run like hell to get to the beach where the little rowboat skiff that they use to go back and forth from the island is located. And on the way, Cillian tries to sort of heroically sacrifice himself to give the rest of them time to get to the boat, to get out into the water, and then Orpin pushes the boat with the other two women in it off into the water with the intention of sacrificing herself to do the same, because the Scrake are right there, so there wouldn't have been any way for her to get back into the boat with them anyway. And then a Scrake gets her and bites her ear, and immediately she knows then nothing else matters because she's all up in Zombie Town at that point onwards. But just then, a team of cool, kick-ass fighting women in pairs shows up, fighting exactly the way that Orpin was trained by her two lesbian moms to fight, and they kill all the Scrakes, capture Cillian as a traitor to the city, and cut off Orpin's infected ear. They all start to head back to Phoenix City, but during the night, Orpin jailbreaks the man and tells him where to go to get to the home on the island that she sent the others to. Obviously, there isn't a boat anymore, so he's gonna have to find a way to get across the water to the island, but at least that's that now. So now it's just Orpin, because Cillian and Aid and Vic, I think her name was, the pregnant woman, are all gonna go off and be safe, and they won't get caught by the Banshees, who are looking for them. One of the Banshees, like while they're still all together, one of the Banshees, the one that is assigned to be Orpin's shadow, tells her, "You don't know this guy. You don't know what happened to the two girls that were with him. Keep your mouth shut." Which is another thing that we'll come back to later, because that's abnormal maybe. The women, who are called Banshees because of course they're called Banshees, treat Orpin something like one of their own, though with slight distrust, and not a little bit of belting on the face, and they head back toward the city. Orpin kind of falls in step with them and figures out that, like, oh, all the training that they've got is very similar to the training that she's got. So there's plot for you. That's the whole story in a nutshell, basically. The ending bit isn't really a twist, so much as the culmination of a confirmation of what an astute reader should have figured out by then anyway. Maureen and Maeve were Banshees, and Banshees are not supposed to get pregnant because they are not breeders. Now Maureen did, so she and her partner Banshee, the pair Shadow Maeve, fled the city and went somewhere far away so that the city's people could not find them again. The city is obviously a dystopia where they have some advanced technologies like self-heating food pellets and like somewhat advanced medicines and creams and that sort of business, but there don't seem to be any guns or much in the way of electronics, and most notably, those that live in Phoenix City apparently can't read, which is weird. Like, while Orpin and Cillian are out in the city looking at signs, Cillian is like, those were written in the before times. And Orpin is like, well, yeah, it says this. And Cillian is like, wait, you can read? What's it say? And then that's a little interesting bit of world building there that we don't really get any explanation for yet, which Orpin was taught to read by Maureen, which maybe indicates that Banshees keep the knowledge of reading, but maybe it's sort of part of the dystopia that only certain classes or castes get to learn how to read. I really hope I'm pronouncing everyone's names correctly. Guaranteed I'm not, because Irish Gaelic is a thing that I only spent about 6 weeks trying to study before I had to give it up for other things. But Davis Goff throws a big spanner into the works at the end of the book by introducing an entire paradigm of new characters and the actual journey to the place that they were trying to get the whole damn book. And while I don't necessarily dislike it, I do think it leaves some readers wanting. Like, the book is clearly not written for children, what with all the killing and viscera and swearing. And thematically, while it's definitely genre fiction, it feels like it toes the line between YA and adult fiction. And it doesn't have much of a resolution for Orpin, who is the main character and protagonist so far, in so much as that it was her goal from the beginning of the story to get to Phoenix City, and now, at the very last page of the book, she is finally actually on her way there. And it's sequel baiting. Of course course it's sequel baiting. Like, with the way that the publishing industry is right now, like, you have to be able to write sequels to books if they end up being good. She actually replied to a tweet I sent her asking when the sequel will be, and she said probably spring or summer of 2023. So get hyped for that release, because I want to find out what happens. I mean, after all, we only got the first part of a story that desperately calls for some kind of resolution or denouement for the protagonist, but all we have right now is a tenuous possibility that she might find more information about her own past and the past of her parents. And that's the only thing that we really have to hold on to right now. So come on, Sarah Davis Goff, give us the stuff. We want it. Let's talk about some theories. The book is set in Ireland, like we mentioned, off the west coast of the mainland, starting on the small island of Slanbeg, which, as far as I can tell, according to Google Maps, isn't real. And it then follows inland towards Phoenix Park, an actual real place that was once designated as a hunting park for the royalty, but is now a conservation with a big zoo, renamed Phoenix City. And it's massive. Like, in real life, it's something like 7 kilometers across. And according to the snippets of information that we get about it, it has been sort of like reinforced as a place of safety, at least for a given value of safety and for a given number of people, I guess. And people seem to be organized into castes, whether breeder or banshee for the women, or it's something else entirely for the men. They had at one point at least a lot more of the kind of supplies that Cillian and his family stole. Cillian, by the way, not actually related to Aid or Vic. They stole a bunch of stuff when they left, and apparently those are rare things now, like the space blankets and the medical creams and that kind of all that business. Apparently they are more rare now, and that points to a long passage of time since the starting of the city as a protective zone. And this is sort of echoed by the overgrown, rusted, and largely destroyed cities and towns that Orphan encounters. So we know that it's at the very least been 1 or 2 generations since the emergency. And like I mentioned, there was once that great bridge that connected Slanbeg with the mainland, but it has been completely, well, not completely, it has been mostly destroyed, cutting Slanbeg off from the mainland and leaving only parts of the bridge actually intact and standing, with long dead corpses still in cars and on foot and that sort of business up on the ruins. This implies that there must have been some sort of sudden explosion or demolition or something that took out the bridge, because if it were planned or had happened after the outbreak had been going for a while, very likely there would not have been that many people, if at all, up on the bridge. And there's also no mention of the Scrake on Slanbeg at all. If I recall correctly, I might be wrong on that one, but to my knowledge, there's no Scrake on Slanbeg at all. The only thing that we get is that the little town on the island is long deserted. Like, there's an old shop and like people's houses and that kind of business on the island, so there had to have been people there at some point, right? But then again, there are documents on the island that talk about Banshees in Phoenix City, because otherwise how else would Orphan have found out about it? And both of those were only presumably created after the emergency happened. So I think it's possible that Slanbeg had boat traffic back and forth from the mainland for a while after the emergency, but then there was maybe someone infected who came back to the island, and there was probably a small-scale outbreak, causing everyone either to leave the island or else end up dead and scraked. And we don't know what the lifespan of a scrake is, but we have seen some pretty decayed ones in the course of the story, so it may be safe to assume that if there was an outbreak, it lasted for some amount of time, but owing to the lack of connection with the mainland, the small nature of the island, and the presumable lack of swimming ability of the Scrake because of how far the water is, it fizzled out somewhat quickly, I guess, relatively. And since there are no new Scrake targets, that means that there's no propagation of the Scrake, and no more food, because everything is either Scrake or already dead, meant the wasting away of the threat. So by the time Maureen and Maeve arrived, there was no Scrake threat on the island. I gotta tell you, this is the biggest thing that I want to know right now. I would love to know what happened to the bridge. Like, a great deal of information could be revealed or theorized or pulled out of the air just by having that teensy little tidbit. And I have politely asked for any little scraps of information from Davis Goff herself, but I believe I will be left alone with this burning question, because at the time of the recording of this video, she has not responded to that tweet. The 2 ex-Banshees get to the island, and then presumably Maureen gives birthed there, and Orphan is raised in a world where, at least for now, there's not much in the way of the threats of the Scrape, but there are stories by the fireside and lessons to be learned about them. The two older women have been on the island long enough to know, with at least a very high degree of certainty, that there are no other people there on the island at all, because they've had to go off the island to look for people that they might be able to join up with at some point. So we know that there aren't any already on the island, because otherwise we would have met them by now. So for upwards of 15 years, the only other humans Orphan knows exists for sure are her two moms. So she's taught to fight like them, and when she does meet the Banshees at the end of the book, she recognizes them immediately, not because of how they look or how they dress or anything like that, but because of how they move. It's like in, you know, old martial arts movies, when like the mysterious traveler comes into town and the main character like watches him fight something and he's like, "Wing!"
Taijutsu, the ancient fighting style, known for its heavy reliance on raw power. I must use my speed and strike at the leg.
That's exactly what's happening here, except for in Orphan's case, it's, oh, that's the way that my mom and my other mom used to fight and taught me how to fight. They must be Scrake killers. And I think that's actually like a really cool thing. Man, I really clocked that guy, didn't I? Sorry, I ran into a little bit of problems on the way in and got into a little bit of a scrape, but I'm on a deadline, gotta make the video, so I'll go take care of this after we're done. It's getting a little hot though, and I am feeling a little bit dizzy. Anyway, it makes sense that that's what her two moms were. They were Banshees, a pair of Banshees that left the city, and so now I'm curious to see how she rationalizes the sort of intense hatred from Maeve and ostensibly Maureen regarding Phoenix City and the Banshees and all of that, with her now being taken back to the city by a group of women that she recognized and feels a kinship to, who are the Banshees. We know that amongst other possible duties, the Banshees seem to be part of an authoritarian policing regime that hunts down those who desert the city. Vic and Aid and Cillian. They're being hunted by this elite fighting squad right now. And I'm not sure whether we, the readers, are supposed to like them or not, but it is certain that Orphan finds a kinship she's never had in her life before with them, like sort of long-lost sisters. And the one that is assigned to her, her shadow, seems to be more accepting of outside ideas than perhaps some of the rest of them are. Now, of course, Orphan gets the snot knocked out of her by the de facto leader of the group, because she will not tell anyone where she's come from, what happens to the people that were with the man that they caught. She won't tell them anything, so she gets the shit knocked out of her a couple times by that leader, but it seems like it might even just be kind of theatrical. This just sort of calls into question whether there will be a subplot next book about a sort of secret faction within Phoenix City that are fighting against what I can only assume is a fascist dictatorship. And I would put my money on that in the city, Orphan gets herself into some kind of trouble or whatever, but manages to be inducted into the Banshees provisionally somehow, and is assigned a watcher to make sure that she stays in line. And that watcher turns out to be part of the resistance or something, because after all, why waste a good fighter that's already had all of that training like her? But then, seeing all of the sort of unfair and immoral stuff that might be happening inside the walls, she's contacted by that faction to be like, you're a double agent now. Work with them, but secretly you're with us. That's a distinct possibility, especially because it sort of falls into the same, like, framework as the modern spy novel at this point, where, like, oh, you are captured by the enemy, and then you go in and work with them because you have the training that they want. So some more stuff might happen in that one, and I think that's possible, and I think it's very interesting. Another possibility that I hadn't really considered until I started writing the script is that she goes on the run from the city after being there for a short time, and has to travel further into the infestation of Ireland, where we might meet other unincorporated survivors. This time, though, she's being hunted by the very same people who have the same training as her. And perhaps those people that are hunting her, some of them might overlook seeing her here and there and that kind of business. But enough speculating on the future, let's talk about the Scrake bite that she gets near the end of the book. She gets bit, but then one of the Banshees grabs her by the ear and saws her ear off, the ear that got bit, and presumably they think that that will keep her from turning for the most part. There's always still maybe a little bit of a chance that the infection spread quickly enough or whatever like that, but they cut off the infected portion, and that is supposed to maybe keep her from turning, which kind of implies that the bite has a sort of toxin or amoeba or something in it that spreads somewhat slowly throughout blood vessels or anything like that, as opposed to some kind of like superstitious magical nature of the zombification process. And it is unclear whether this knowledge is new or whether Maeve and Maureen had it beforehand, but it doesn't really actually make a difference whether they knew it or not, because the only scrakifying wounds that we have seen so far have been in places that are central to the body and can't just be cut off real quick like. But in any case, it still does call into question how much humans at large know about the spread of the thing. So what, as we know, is a scrake? Scrake are people who have been somehow affected by the bodily fluids of an existing zombified creature. We know that it must be at least partially bloodborne because Orphan worries when she gets scrake blood across her face, but it must also either be saliva or other fluid based as well, because it gets transferred by bites primarily. We know that the infection takes different amounts of time for each person, especially if they are not immediately killed at the time of the infection. We know that the affected person retains at least some of their intellect throughout the process, in stages perhaps, and that some may even remain after the final turning, as evidenced by Maeve and Maureen Scrake still knowing Orphan's name and recognizing her, even while they are trying to bite her open and suck out the juices inside. We know that they are strong, fast, and brutal, and that they seem to be somewhat immune to pain and can be defeated basically like most zombies. Damage the head enough and they stop moving. Now, given that the inciting incident is called the emergency and not something like the accident, there's nothing really in that title that we have to work any further on. All we know is that Scrake act like traditional Romero zombies with an added bit of maybe a little bit of extra recollection involved. And I am sure that we will find out more of them in the future once the sequel comes out, but being that there's never any mention of like aircraft or anything flying overhead or anything, it also makes me wonder how far the disease, plague, zombie thing has spread. Ireland itself is also a huge island, which is sort of like a mediocosm. Like if Slanbeg is a microcosm, then Ireland is the bigger version of it and it goes one step up. But now Ireland is an island and the rest of the world is next step up. So I wonder how far the zombie thing is actually spread. Like technically, because Ireland is a big island itself, there's a distinct possibility that if the rest of the world was incredibly lucky and acted very quickly, they could have cut off contact with Ireland and continued on with the rest of the world with the knowledge that the green land mass over that side of the pond is full of zombies. Unlikely, especially given what we know about how it spreads and how dangerous it is and what it does to places. There's a very good chance that it has spread all over the place, especially because the gestation period for it can be up to like 15 or 16 days. Thematically, the book talks a lot about what it means to be a parent, exemplified by the sort of cold and somewhat unfeeling way that Maeve continues to bring up Orphan after Maureen's death, that nevertheless was a motherly way to go about it. It's never her mother's voice that Orphan hears in her head when the going gets rough, it's always Maeve. Maeve is the one who really taught her how to keep her head clear and her body safe, really drilled into her the skills needed to survive in the world they lived in. Orphan didn't realize how much she appreciated it until Maeve's death, when all of everything that had happened in the past 3 years prior all piled up together and presented her with the second great loss of her entire life. And in losing Maeve, she realized that what she'd been taking for granted was in fact the closest thing to a replacement for a mother that she could have, even if that experience was less of a loving and coddling and, nice experience and more of a, this is the way that I show my love for you by teaching you how to stay alive in a crazy shitty world like this one. There's also themes of feminism here, and I am 100% unqualified for this topic, but it did stick with me more often than not that it was men are dangerous rather than people are dangerous. Both of them did show up, we did get both of those statements, but in general, the threat of men was driven home into Orphan's head pretty standardly. I'm sort of ill-equipped to comment on this, being that I don't have much in the way of this sort of study, but it does kind of tend to be true. Orphan's relentless continuation at all costs is another sort of theme to look at. Her goal, initially, to find Phoenix City with Maeve and get her possibly cured, does come to an end when Maeve finally turns and she has to kill Maeve personally. And it is only at the point where she's lost both her parents and therefore the reason that she was going to Phoenix City in the first place that she momentarily gives up and waits for the Scrake to just come and get her. It takes the man dragging her bodily to her feet to get her back in the game, and then the goal changes immediately to meeting back up with the others and getting them to Slanbeg, where it's marginally safe, and neither the Scrake nor Phoenix City are likely to find them. And then only after that can she get back on track to going to Phoenix City herself. She doesn't really show more than that one point of total weakness, in keeping with the training that Maeve imparted on her. And yes, she does complain a lot to herself, but not really to others. I mean, not especially because there's only so many people around that she can actually complain to, but like, the point remains that her experience is almost universally that she's got something to do and she absolutely must do it at all costs. And I don't exactly know why it is she wants to go to Phoenix City now, especially hearing from people that came from there that it's a real bad place and not like a great place to be for anybody right now. The Banshees are there. And she's basically a banshee. And at the point that we're at right now, she's looking for a way to rationalize her own existence now, because now her parents are gone, her dog is gone, she doesn't have her old home anymore, she literally has nothing but her training, and that's a point of connection, so there's that. So in a way she's actually more, in a way, she's more like Maeve than her mother at this point, and we know that Maeve also had that sort of indomitable spirit thing going on too. In apocalypse stories like this one, it's a really important aspect to have at least someone, like at least one person, has to have this thing. They don't have to be relentlessly chipper or anything, but at least one person has to have the drive to not just stop and die. I'm really looking forward to the sequel. To be honest, I hope it dispenses with the back and forth time jumping between the chapters, but I know that Davis Goff's got the skill to write the story well and in the way that she knows, God, she knows will work best. This stings a lot. Like, I gotta clean this up when we're done, because dang, does this sting. Anyway, pick the book up yourself, give it a read, so that when the sequel comes out, you can get on top of it the same time as me. This is also the second time that I have tweeted at one of my favorite living authors, and they have responded back to me. Like, they actually said, yes, I would like to see the things that you are working on. So, Sarah Davis Goff, if you are watching this video right now, thank you so much, not only for watching it, and for giving me the time to rant about the things that are in the book. There's a lot more that I would love to talk about, but it's beyond the scope of just this one video. But also, thank you for writing the book in the first place, because without it, I wouldn't have been able to sit and yell about books for a long time. And as the people on my channel know, there's a couple things I'm good at, and one of them is yelling about books. Thank you very much for coming and watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe buttons because it helps us immensely. It helps me immensely as a creator to know that people are actually enjoying the things that I am putting out for them. I hope that you enjoyed listening to me yell about the thing. There's more of these coming up. I've got one in the works for Perfectly Preventable Deaths and its sequel, Precious Catastrophe. Both of which are exceedingly good, and I am to understand that Sarah Davis Goff actually knows the author of those books as well, because I've seen them talk back and forth on Twitter, and so that's also cool that two of my favorite authors know each other in real life as well. I have a Discord. You can come in there. I'm trying to be better about using it, but I've got a lot of other stuff going on right now as well. I'm writing my master's thesis, so look for videos on the books that I'm going to talk about there. It is currently like 37 degrees Celsius in my house right now, so if it weren't for the fact that I've just gotten into a fight with some very violent gentleman outside, I would still be sweating like a pig, so that might be why this video is a little bit more chaotic than usual, is because it is very hot. But anyway, again, I hope that you enjoyed it. I will see you next time.